All right. Hello and good morning. Thanks for joining today. Let's see. Today we're going to be going through physical pen testing, tales and takeaways from the field. This whole talk is designed to be entertaining and informative all at the same time, so you can have some takeaways at the end for physical security in your own organizations, as well as hopefully some laughs, because there's some times when doing these physical pen tests, when things go awry, they run amok, but make for a great story. We'll be going through an intro, who I am, why that's relevant, physical security and physical pen testing 101. We'll cover some lessons learned and a few case studies along the way. Then we'll touch into breaking into your own house with the tools provided in the FCON box, and then we'll get into some time for some Q&A. So who am I? Roy Vreeland is my name. Spaceship is my wonderful hacker handle. And I'm a senior security architect here with Fulcrum. I'm on the offensive operations team. My background is largely in red teaming, and that includes red teaming in the cyber context as well as the physical pen testing. I've always been a very curious human, so the physical pen testing side fell right into place for me. I got my start in this world back when I was in the military, where I was doing a lot of DoD red team assessments. So we'd be breaking into actual federal agencies physically and having cyber effects while we do it. I've had the privilege of working with a lot of large companies and a lot of really cool projects, everything from power plants to wastewater treatment, emergency services, police stations, hospitals, and everything in between. I think I've done somewhere between 30 and 40 operations at this point for physical pen tests. And what's with the yellow scooter? It's this was where I got my start in lock picking. I was actually 11 years old, and I worked all summer splitting firewood out in rural Colorado, and all I wanted was a dirt bike. I couldn't afford a dirt bike, so I got this sweet 1970s Yamaha Chappie scooter, and I got it from a neighbor, and he had lost the key for it. So I had to learn how to pick the lock on this thing in order to get it to run and ride it around as a little kid. So fortunately, it only had 3 pins and it was very easy to do, but this was my start into lock picking. What is physical pen testing? So most people know pen testing in the capacity of cybersecurity, where a bad guy will come in and try to break in using real tactics, techniques, and processes in order to identify weaknesses in your networks. Physical pen testing is no different, where we use very oftentimes creative means to be able to gain access to physical assets. This could be just getting access to a floor in an office space. It could be getting into a server room and then having cyber effects from there, as most physicals do have a cyber component, that I do at least. And here in Fulcrum, we like to blend those two together to give a very real world holistic picture of what an adversary could actually do if you were to be able to get into your building. Yeah, a lot of this is human error, which is wild to me. How much of the accesses we can get are from physical weaknesses, and it's not because you don't have the best lock or the best door. It's oftentimes installations and other security gaps that we'll jump into here shortly. Great. Yes, let's go. Why does it matter? This is one of the assessment types that, from my perspective, is often overlooked by most organizations. And that's a bummer, because you don't realize the value that it can bring until you actually do it, till you realize, like, wow, this guy was able to break into my whole building with a zip tie. That's crazy. Insider threats are a very real thing in today's corporate landscape. If you have a disgruntled employee, they can wreak havoc from the inside of your building. If they're able to walk into, doesn't even need to be a server room, but just a separate office space, and have effects on computers, lock people out, have a physical denial of service type situation going on, that is a very real threat. Not to mention corporate espionage. Uh, Data and intellectual property is extraordinarily valuable, and we want to protect that. And just general security. Again, this is making sure that your access control measures on the physical side work just as well as the ones within cyber. We don't want to overlook any of them because your weakest link will most certainly get exploited by some nefarious actor. Physical testing toolkits. All right, this is where it gets pretty fun. Of course, the toolkit used is going to depend on the operation that we're doing. A lot of recon is how we start any assessment, which will dictate the specific tools and techniques that we'll use to gain access to whether it's a building, water treatment plant, a 911 call center, or whatever it might be. But some of the basics, clipboard, one with internal storage pockets. These are great, especially for dissuading or convincing other people that you belong in a certain space. A guy walking around with a clipboard usually doesn't get stopped too often. If you have a clipboard in front of you and you can walk around with a sense of purpose, you're usually not going to get stopped. I like to print out just a blank, could be a DMV form or a government form, something that looks official, make it look like you're doing something really important. Also having a yellow vest. We don't need complicated disguises, but a vest, a bright fluorescent vest is enough to keep most people off your back. Make it look like you're just having a rough day and you'll be left alone 9 times out of 10. ID badges on a lanyard. It doesn't matter if that ID card matches the organization you're trying to get into. If you just have badges on you, badges, what they represent is authority. So if you have any type of authority on your chest or on one of the retractable gizmos on your hip, that's going to give you an edge and be able to gain access to all sorts of areas. A lockpick set. This one's great because contrary to popular belief, a lot of physical pen testing is not sitting there stealthily picking locks in the background and doing all that cool stuff. I'll keep a very, very basic set with a couple picks and tension wrenches, but nothing over the top, because more often than not, physical access can be achieved without picking the locks themselves. An underdoor tool is another one that I love to travel and go onto ops with. These come in handy very often, and that can be seen in the center picture here. It's the long metal rod with a weird little string attached to the end. Essentially, these are tools that can be slid underneath the door that you're trying to get into, based on the assumption that is a lever style door rather than a knob style door, which is required by code in most corporate and office buildings these days. This tool slips under the door, can be leveraged up. The string has typically a little snare on it that can grab the lever, and then you pull the string from underneath the door, and boom, you've just opened the door for yourself. Easy cheesy. Random metal wire comes in handy more often than you might think. You might need to wedge something, prop something up, secure something. Just little things like these help a ton. Same with zip ties. They go a long way and can be improvised to make other tools when you need them. Flippers, not the dolphin as portrayed in this picture, but a flipper is a pretty popular cybersecurity tool nowadays. These are great because they're small. They have the ability to clone RFID badges and tags, and as well as emulate them from the device itself. They're pretty inconspicuous by design, which is great. They don't look like you're carrying a hacker tool. It's very benign looking to unknowing eyes. Not only does it do RFID cloning and badge cloning, it can also do things like Wi-Fi hacking with an additional module. It's got a lot of fun features, and it doubles as basically like a little Tamagotchi where you keep your little flipper character happy on the screen if you ever get bored and stuck in a stairwell. Definitely never happened to me. A get out of jail free card. That's what we lovingly call typically a signed rules of engagement document for most of these assessments. This will be a piece of paper that simply says, hey, this is who we are. Here's what we're authorized to do within the context of this assessment. Here's what we're not able to do. and here's the people to contact if I get caught. So if I were to be in a situation where the authorities were called or I were confronted or anything would happen, I can simply pull this out of my pocket, show it to the people in question, whether that's police or local staff, and fess up and say, hey, yep, you caught me. Great job, but I'm supposed to be here, and here's the proof of that. They don't work all the time, though, as we'll get into with another case study in a bit in the case of some coal fire pen testers. And last, but certainly not least in our physical testing toolkit are key rings. This, this cracks me up because this is a screenshot down here on Amazon, which you can go buy. Just anyone can go and buy $40 and you get all these different keys. These keys are absolutely great because they give you access to things like filing cabinets. Sounds lame, but filing cabinets are still used in a lot of corporate environments, which can get you access to some wonderful, juicy information. Also in there are elevator keys. So if you want to get into an elevator, get to a specific floor, put it into maintenance mode or fire mode where you won't be disturbed or get calls from other floors, that's a possibility too. Also are the exterior keypads like the Door King systems and the ones with the typically 3 big buttons on them that give access to apartments, properties, what have you. These all use universal keys, and you can buy these key ring sets online for very, very cheap to do all kinds of nefarious activities. And one of my favorites that may or may not be in this particular key ring set is a Ford Fleet key. Ford will, to save money, use a similar key for a ton of its vehicles. This includes basically every Crown Vic, so that's police cars, taxi cabs now when they're repurposed, and even newer Ford automobiles sometimes will share a key. So you can get access and drive away some of these cars. Great. Well, let's talk about human errors in physical security. This starts with an operation that I did a couple of years ago. There was the client campus where they had their office buildings and IT buildings. And next to that campus was a coffee shop. So I noticed that each of the employees were wearing lanyards of some kind and they had badges. And my goal was to clone one of those badges so I could get into the IT office space. So what I did was I went to the coffee shop sporting this very stylish leather satchel, which inside of it had a specialized high power antenna in it, which will pick up and be able to clone the RFID tags that are coming from most of these different badges. And I would stand in line awkwardly behind some of the employees, whether they had the badge on their hip or around their neck. I'd be able to get close enough to them. And usually it's about 12 to 18 inches, somewhere in that range. Sort of not uncomfortably close, but close enough where it's like, why is this guy getting next to me? This is weird. But it works. You're able to clone badges this way pretty easily. After spending a little bit of time and getting too caffeinated in this coffee shop, I went back to the main campus and I checked the software on the badge reader and the setup that I had cloned. I noticed that I got 2 good reads, which was all I needed because I was just using one of those. I cloned it to a proper badge that I then put in a lanyard around my own neck and beeped myself into the building. This was absolutely great. And this was the goal of the assessment, was to get into a certain building, get into the IT space, which I had just done, then get to a certain member of the staff's office. Now I was in the building. I was walking by employees. This was during the week, and this was not a very busy building. I believe there was probably 30 or 40 people in there. But enough to where, you typically know the folks that you work with. I wasn't questioned at all. And what I did once I was inside the building was start checking to see where my badge worked and where it didn't. What rooms could it get me in and what ones could it not? The short answer is it got me into pretty much everywhere, including their server rooms, their battery backup rooms, their generator rooms, maintenance, all the above. So I was having a great time. and went up to the office spaces where my ultimate target was to get into the office of one of the execs. I get up there and I notice the door is locked. I can't get in, and the door attached is on a hallway, and there's people walking by in the hallway. So I'm like, dang, how am I going to get in here? Because it looks pretty suspicious when someone's picking a lock, but it's less suspicious if someone's down on their knees tying their shoe. So I got down onto a knee. I make it look like I'm tying my shoe, but what I do is I pull out my underdoor tool and I slide it under the door. I get it up. I snare it onto the latch itself, and I hear a voice behind me that says, "Hey, what are you up to?" And I turn around and I just kind of smile and say, "Oh, I dropped my wallet. I think it's under here somewhere." The guy gave me like this weird look. He knew something was up, but not enough to actually do anything about it, which was great. He just walked on and was like, "Huh, that's kind of weird." And as soon as he went around the corner, I was able to then pull the snare on the underdoor tool and let myself right into that office. Mission achieved. And that was a ton of fun. But again, this is one of those situations where human error comes into play. Trust but verify people. That's an important piece of the puzzle here when it comes to physical security. You typically know a lot of the people that are in your office space, but if you don't, maybe they're a vendor. It's good to have vendor badges or require an escort for these people. But in this case, it did not work. This emphasizes an over reliance on technology, right? People assume that if you're in a secured area, you are allowed to be there. So the door readers and badge systems here were the problem. And that's our first lesson is trusting appearances can be costly. Didn't even have a disguise as cool as this guy's, but if I did, that would have helped probably. Again, this is touches on the clipboard aspect of things, right? Look like you know what you're doing, and a lot of the times you won't get stopped. People are awesome, but they will usually trust appearances and not verify them, which great for me, but not so good for overall physical security of a building. Proper remediation for this is just train staff to verify identities. If someone looks suspicious, then confront them. I know it's not human nature to want to do that a lot of the time, but it's a good thing to do, especially in a restricted space. Also requiring an escort for vendors. That way, if someone is unescorted in a space, then you know they're probably not supposed to be there. Let's talk some common physical vulnerabilities. So you might have very, very good locks set up on your doors in an organization, but that's usually not how bad guys get in. If you have a door jamb gap that's 2 inches wide, you can get in there with all sorts of tools, slipping tools like the ones set in the kit. We'll get into how to use those later, and open them right up from the outside. So if that strike plate gap to the door is large enough, you can do a lot of things. Also, if the strike plate hole is large enough and the bolt's just sitting in there, you can manipulate that thing all the way to next Wednesday. Hinge orientation is also a huge one. If you have a super secure area, why would you ever put the hinges on the outside of that door? You wouldn't. That's an installation error, because another tool that I will sometimes carry around is a hinge popping tool, which is essentially a big metal rod on a spring that you can use to just thwack the hinge pins straight out of a door and walk it open. There are remediations for this, and obviously this is a very overt technique. This is not something you're going to do in the middle of a workday and not get stopped for it. But the amount of times you see these on exterior doors is pretty high. So next time you're walking through your office space, keep an eye out for hinge orientation on doors. And then zip ties. If anyone has seen these two locks on the bottom of the screen before, it might make you feel good or terrible if they're in your company to know that you can get through these and bypass the lock and security mechanisms entirely with a zip tie. These are pretty pricey commercial lock systems that we'll pronounce it schleg for all intensive purposes. Jury's out on the right way to pronounce that, but These are all over the place and they're pretty expensive locks. They're $500 a pop. They can be programmed for RFID, keypad, or just numbers. And you can have a card swipe in there too. But the picture on the right shows just an ordinary zip tie. And I was at another client site for this one where I found this in the field. And I was after hours trying to get in. I was hiding in the stairwell waiting for the last of the employees to leave. And I found this exploit for this online. So the premise of it is there's a drain hole in the bottom of these locks underneath the handle. And what one can do is reach a zip tie about 5 inches in. And with these little tabs that were cut into the zip tie, it'll hook onto one of the latching pawls for the locking mechanism. So once you slip the zip tie in, you can simply pull it back down and unlatch the door itself. Making the zip tie in this way took longer than the actual bypass of the lock because I had to figure out a way to do this, to put these notches in there. I see there's a question, but we'll get to those here toward the end. But what I did was take a nail clipper set that I had in my backpack and the zip tie and simply cut these little notches in with a nail clipper, then slid it into the drain port of these locks. And then I was off. I was inside of this building, which contained the server rooms for this company. This one was a lot of fun. Which brings us to our next lesson. Physical barriers only work if they're effective, right? Again, this is bypassing weak or outdated locks. Vulnerabilities for those include the zip ties that we saw. There are fixes for that one specifically. One is a weird little plug for the drain hole. Weak physical barriers obviously undermine security practices. So large door jams, doors being out of alignment, locks not being set up correctly, the hinge positioning like we've talked about. And another one that encompasses different factors like physical and social are piggybacking. Piggybacking's huge. It's something that regularly gets me into places. It's usually frowned on in most organizations, but not a lot of companies will actually enforce it because it's tough, right? It's a very tricky thing. We want to be nice and hold the door open for people, let them in if they're right behind us. But that's not verifying who they are. That's not letting them scan their badge. And that's letting them get right into your organization. Security, physical security, only as strong as its weakest point. Secure all entry points. Yeah, this is pretty obvious. Okay. I was doing an assessment on a 911 call center in a state capital. These call centers are pretty well locked down. They're filled with police and different law enforcement types, sheriffs, and all those guys, as well as civilians, and they're managing all the calls within a county. They're covering all sorts of important data. They don't want it leaked. It's a pretty tight space. So my initial plan for this to gain access was to be ironic and come in with a box of donuts in the elevator and piggyback into this facility. This is one of the elevators that requires a key card just to get to this specific floor. So I walked in the elevator behind a couple people in the morning with a box of donuts thinking this was going to be easy. Someone pushes the button for the call center floor and we get up there and I start following right behind him, assuming that the guy with the donuts is definitely going to be let in. That was not the case at all. These folks did a great job of keeping me out and saying no. They were just like, hey, if those are for us, drop them off at reception, do your thing. So that was a bummer. So I had to reevaluate the plan. I went back downstairs where the elevator would take me and started munching a donut because this picture rings true to my heart. If we have any other chocolate cake donut fans in here, oh my gosh, they're the best. So I was trying to find other ways in, and I noticed a door to a stairwell that was behind the main part of the office. So I went into the stairwell and went up to the fourth floor where this call center was, and there was no security on it, not a lock, not a keypad, nothing. And I open it up and boom, I'm right there on the 911 call center floor. So mission achieved. No locks, no bypassing required, no piggybacking, no nothing like that. So at that point, I had to ditch the donuts because of that. Just wouldn't work on the rest of the way in, and got in and sat down at a terminal and just kind of raised my hand and said, "Hey, we did it. We've achieved our objectives in this case. So you guys should have stopped this." Again, weak point, stairwells. This is going to include things like windows as well. How often do people leave windows open? It's pretty common. And staff awareness for these entry points. People need to know the ways in and out of a building for code reasons. They need to know where someone might come into an office space like that and know what is acceptable and what isn't. In this case, a random person coming in from the back stairwell into this sensitive area is not allowed. Don't overlook these entry points, right? Because they're everywhere. Social engineering and human behavior. This one's pretty broad because human behavior as it applies to physical pen testing and physical security is probably the biggest weak link for most orgs. As humans, we tend to get into the pattern of thinking the same way about things. That routine thinking makes us vulnerable, right? It's okay, I know that I go in with this every morning with this group of people, easy cheesy. Complacency leads to security holes. That's just the way it is. People want to help other people too, which doesn't help. We have an inherent desire to be kind, I think, in most people, not all, but most people. And then you trust familiar faces. So there's some fun examples of this. There's the I've got an interview. Will you please print this for me trick? This one's pretty interesting. I've never pulled this off myself, but the premise is that you come up to a reception desk of a company, you say, "Oh, you come up with a coffee stained piece of paper. Oh my gosh, please help. I spilled my coffee all over my resume and I have an interview in 5 minutes." If that person is not a sociopath on the other side, like they'll probably have some empathy and sympathy for you. If you say, "Hey, will you please plug in this USB drive to print this off for me, print off a copy?" USB drive, if you're not familiar on the cyber side, is something we'll load a malicious implant into. And for the cyber pen testing side, all we need is for you to plug it into your computer, and we've basically owned that system for all intents and purposes. So we're relying on this person to have some empathy and print us off the document that we want them to plug this device into their system. And once that happens, we've met our goal and we're happy campers. So again, yeah, with that, people want to help. Don't let them piggyback. Again, piggybacking is a form of social engineering. It sometimes, or it can be, and people are willing to overlook protocol if they have a plausible story, like with the USB trick. And people need to maintain vigilance when it comes to these scenarios and situations. Because if you have someone who's nefarious in their intent, they're willing to take advantage of that human kindness, take advantage of all those things in order for them to achieve their needs. But here we can see well-trained employees saving the day, keeping the physical pen tester away from piggybacking. Okay, what are our key lessons with physical security? One, trust but verify. We love that. Verify new faces. And that doesn't mean you have to say, "Hey, who are you? What are you doing here?" It can be as simple as, "Hey, I haven't seen you around here before. What's going on?" You can be friendly about it. There's no problem with that. But at least you can put pressure on someone who may not be supposed to be in your area to come up with a random story at the last minute. That might throw them off enough to get in suspicion and to alert someone for an unwanted presence. Strong physical barriers. Again, this is going to cover everything from door installation to different protection installations. Make sure that things are installed properly, from doors to locks, that that all entry points are secured. Windows, stairwells, RFIDs are used, and modern ones too, right? So RFID cloning is usually restricted to a specific type of RFID badge, which are the older non-challenge response types. Newer ones are much trickier to clone and require a different process for gaining a hold of. So don't cheap out when it comes to these things. Don't cheap out on installation, on the security measures themselves, and especially on training and vigilance, because as we've talked about, the human factor is huge when it comes to physical security. Here's one a lot of you might have heard of, the Coal Fire arrests in 2019. Coal Fire is an organization that does a lot of pen tests as well, and they had two testers at an Iowa courthouse. And the premise of the story goes as follows. They were authorized to be there. They had their get out of jail free card. They had everything in place they thought they needed. They communicated with the client about what was going on, when it's going on, etc. But these two, they broke into a courthouse and they set off an alarm. And pen testers in this situation, if you set off an alarm, it's like, hey, hold up, full stop. You just sit there, you wait for the police or authorities to come. That's what you do. You're not going to try to evade the police or try to disable the alarm or anything like that. Like that's we're not going to mess with that. And these two did exactly that. They did the right thing. They waited for police and authorities to show up. And initially, it was the local police. The local police heard their story. These guys said, hey, we're pen testers. Here's our get out of jail free card. We're allowed to be here. We did our thing. The problem came in with the local sheriff because they were about ready to be let go by the local police. But the sheriff said, no, hold up. I need to check this out. Sheriff comes down, doesn't believe their stories at all. Largely, this was in part to the tools that they had, which they used the thin plastic cutting boards to slip the latch on these doors. Slim plastic cutting board, yes. We have sent you all out these nice metal tools, which are great, but there's all sorts of other shims and tools you can use to get into doors, and thin plastic cutting boards is an effective, cheap one of these tools that you can modify to use exactly for this purpose. The sheriff saw some of the tools that they had along with because they also were having a cyber component to this. Saw that they had these weird things, and the sheriff didn't buy their story, so they threw him in jail. Initially, it was a 24-hour hold and $5,000 in bail, but they went to court, and this is where the interesting miscommunication part comes in about this, is the state did not clearly communicate to the county what was going on. So when the sheriff, who's got the jurisdiction in this area, comes in and sees this, he hasn't heard about any testing going on. He doesn't know. He's, in fact, hasn't even dealt with physical pen testers before. So he thinks that they are making stuff up, that they're clever burglars trying to get out of a situation. He convinced the judge of that, the local judge, and they raised the bill to $50,000 each, which is 10 times the initial $5,000 bail. And they were arrested on charges for felony burglary and possession of burglary tools. Not a fun time, not a fun spot for a pen tester, and I'm crossing my fingers that doesn't happen to me, knock on wood. Okay. After this, it became pretty clear there were some miscommunications. And long story short, there was a happy-ish ending. All charges were dropped ultimately, but it comes down to a communication error with these guys. Inter-organizational communication. So the state did not clearly communicate with the counties about what was going on. And again, when we say communicate about what's going on in the context of a cyber pen test or a physical pen test, is not to tell everyone that something's going on to make sure everyone's alert to it, because that's going to take away from the realness and the emulation of an adversary. Right? You want to have key people involved, key stakeholders involved at different levels, but not to where every single person knows it's happening, right? You still want the process to be authentic and accurate. This was not the case for the Coal Fire guys. So again, takeaways: communicate clearly through the whole chain of command about what's going on. This includes getting things in writing. Fortunately, this was done in this case, which is why the coal fire guys were able to get let off in the way that they were. There was no hard feelings afterward, um, to an extent, I'm sure. And finally, tell the sheriff. Tell the person who can make some of those calls at the local levels if something's going on. Inform your people, at least at some level, that you might be broken into. Even if it's only one person on site, at least they'll have some sort of coverage so that this doesn't happen. And again, getting everything in writing, be extremely clear and detailed on ROEs, expectations, client expectations about what we as an organization would do for you, the client, in these situations. Okay, if we know that bypassing locks is in scope, that's great. If we know that disabling alarms is not, good. We will clearly articulate that to make sure that what we do is covered by law on your side and on ours. Oh, now things get fun. So thanks to Randall for this image here, we can see that the kit sent out to each of y'all has a couple of different tools in it. Again, these tools are for your own personal use. Don't use them at your work or office space unless your boss gives you approval, in which case, yeah, go hard. But there's some lock picks, which were covered in the lock picking talk yesterday. So that's great. Hopefully there's been some time to practice on those and apply these real world skills. But there's two primary tools that are included in the kit. We have the large 90-degree big boy piece of steel. We'll call this a force tool for all intents and purposes. I think it even says chaos on it, if I can see correctly. So that's pretty great. But this tool is designed to be used in emergency situations, which is why it's like intended for firefighters and things of that sort. If you go reference the manufacturer's website. This tool is designed to kind of put in place and smash down onto a latch and force it open if you need to. That's the long pointed end, can bypass things like security wedges and security panels. Yeah, kind of like this. So this is the intended use case for the long pointed end of the chaos tool, the chaos bar. And then the other side we can see from the photos is designed to be a latch pull or latch push, which is great. Again, this is our force tool, meaning it's big and it's beefy and it's probably going to scratch some things up. So if you try this on your home door, expect it to leave some marks, scratch paint. If it's wood, be careful. But these can be very effective if you're locked out of your house and have one in your car or otherwise. The other tool is from a company called Sparrow, same as the lock picks and the practice locks, if I'm not mistaken. And this one is more of a finesse tool, where the chaos bar is a force tool. This one's a finesse tool. It will probably still leave marks, scratch up doors and door jams, but it is much easier to use. It's designed to be discreet. And here's a great use case for this one specifically, where the hooked side of it is designed to go past the latch on a door and then pull it open. So you'd get it, the card into the place as seen in this picture, and then pull it straight back, and that'll force the bolt open, and then the door can swing right open for you. This tool, the Sparrows card, also has the facilities for the tab push, and this is the pull, obviously, so you can use it to push latches from the other side. And it's a great time. All right, that's kind of the high level use of these, but what I'd like to do is open this up to questions and answer time. So we can get questions about the tools themselves, about stories, about anything else. So I know we had one before. Let me jump into the Q&A. Colin says, military sanctioned hacking, that sounds like a dream. Oh my gosh, yeah. What do the kids say? Hashtag very fortunate. Just thrilled to have that for that have been my experience with the military, moving around to these different agencies, and honestly, it made pen testing, especially physical pen testing on the outside, so much easier because when you're used to doing it with guys that have guns, it's pretty scary. And now everything compared to that is much safer and much more benign. So yeah, thanks for that comment. And it was an awesome one. All right. Another question. How do you diffuse a situation when you've been caught? That's a great question. And it sort of depends on the context, right? And how in deep I am. For a lot of situations, like where I was using the underdoor tool on an office and told them I dropped my wallet and I was trying to find it. That one's relatively simple because if you can kind of come up with a little thing on the spot, then it's going to be much easier to get out of that versus if you're in a situation where you're let's just say all the way inside of a very secure facility, no badges, you have your laptop out, you're plugged into a switch or something like that. So it's going to depend on the situation. And diffusing the situation only goes so far, right? There's a time that we'll usually write out in ROEs where we say, okay, this means you got caught, whether it's being confronted by employees, that could be enough, just any sort of like question asking or otherwise, because that is the goal, right? Is to build employee awareness and that vigilance. But there's other situations when that won't be the case, and I'll sit there like in the coal fire example of, hey, I need an adult. I'm a bad guy. I did it. We got caught. Yeah, just ops over at that point. I hope that answers your question. Has anyone had the chance to use their tools or practice with them at all? Is there a way to open this up to more of a chat? Can we get, yeah, if anyone wants to even speak on this with their experiences with these tools, with the lock picks, with anything in general, would love to hear some of that. Okay. Well, it sounds like not so much. And we'll run back through these tools real quick. And again, we have a force tool, we have a finesse tool. Remember that when you use the force tool, it's going to, Colin says, I used the tools from a prior FCon, was surprised how easy it was to pick my house lock. Oh my gosh. Yeah, we get that a lot. That's a very real thing. Home security versus commercial security is pretty interesting and sort of terrifying because even with home locks and home security, it's not uncommon for them to only have a certain number of key sets that are available for that lock style, right? So you can go find your key number from a home lock and then be able to use that on other people's houses if they have the same lock. I think for a lot of companies, there's like 8 to 10 different iterations of that. They're not all completely different, or they can be, but that's usually not the case for like a Home Depot lock, if you will, like the prosumer territory of lock. I'll start at the top. Is Mitnick still the GOAT? Yeah, Mitnick's great. He's a legend. You can't knock him. I mean, in my opinion, I grew up like worshiping that dude, so he's pretty great. Brady says, how often do you use the flipper on engagements? Oh, love that. There's usually a fair amount. Again, it's going to depend on the engagement type, but the flipper is very capable. There's a few other more, we'll call them commercial / high grade tools that you can put together for RFID cloning and otherwise. But when it comes to the flipper, honestly, its form factor is tiny. It fits in your pocket. So it does absolutely great on engagements. And honestly, I carry it with me all the time, even when I'm not on an engagement, because I have my own house keys, which are RFID. Oh God, I just said that to this audience. here we go. But yes, use the flipper all the time. It's a wonderful tool and definitely recommend it, especially if you're working to get into the industry or just want to play around and tinker, which I think is a lot of our audience here. So thanks for that question, Brady. Danny, what can you do to slip the latch if the plunger is aligned properly? Great question. So it's going to depend again. We have, let's see, so with a metal tool and a metal plunger, a lot of the time what you can do is kind of, this is hard to demonstrate without one in my hand, but you can use that metal tool and the metal plunger to help push it or get the dead pin on the back side of it actually engaged to where the bolt will move again, if that makes sense. So you can use the metal tools on a metal thing where it'll gall and kind of dig in a little bit to push it if it doesn't have a dead latch on the back. And if it does, you can oftentimes use, for example, the long thin point of the sparrow's card to reach it around back and use that to manually pull in the deadbolt itself on the plunger. I hope that answers your question. Gary, how do you go about avoiding sensors and alarms, or do you mostly work during hours to avoid security measures? I prefer to work during regular business hours for that very reason, because honestly, a good security system is very hard to get by, and the ramifications of setting off an alarm at night is usually higher than the reward of doing it during the day or otherwise, because no one wants to deal with the police response and everything else. So typically, we'll try to do things during hours, but after hours is a possibility. Those are more like well, they're still physical assessments, but they're not going to be as invasive, right? We'll go around and audit things like, hey, do these windows and doors have these sensors? Do the services work? We might do a test to make sure they work. And it depends on the sensor types and alarm types, because even with home security, I find it comical, honestly, when people will put like the security company sign in front of their house, because you know that it's, hey, they're working with these resources. You can go Google and find out the lock types and sensor types they use if we're talking about home security and everything else. So there's, yeah, a lot of information out there about them, but when it comes to like big industrial alarms and sensors, context dependent, but most customers aren't super about doing it after hours where you'd have a massive response if something went wrong. Home locks equal speed bump. Yeah, yep, for sure. Colin also says the Flipper Zero is fun. You can use it on the Nintendo Switch to fake amiibo. I don't know what that is, but not surprised. There's all kinds of cool third-party apps and firmwares and things you can do with the Flipper. It's an absolute blast. And I think they're dropping in price too. There should be, for a while there, they were like super expensive because they stopped producing them, or they stopped importing, I should say. Spencer says the lockpick set was fun. I do need to get the force tool. Wasn't in the box, but pick one lock a week just to turn my brain off and get that that stare. Yeah, it's fun to tell your friends not to throw the lock away. Send it to me. Love that. Heck yeah. Yep, the flipper also does traditional RF and infrared. So it can do a lot of pretty interesting things like emulate remote controls. If I'm not mistaken, gas station signs are a popular target for the flipper community because a lot of those are IR and you can change gas prices or put up funny messages, things of that sort. So yeah, they are certainly very capable. Vien says, would you consider a grappling hook a part of your red team arsenal toolkit? I really wish I were that cool to pull off a grappling hook. Oh, that sounds like fun though. That's some Indiana Jones stuff. But sign me up. If there's an op that called for it, I think that would be so much fun. Obviously with the right safety gear, but in general, that sounds super cool. I like how you think. Let's do that. That's why you put a fake different company in the front from Simon. I'm not sure the context of that. Fake company in the front of what exactly? Too much fun. Colin says, "What are some good authentic movies to watch? Hackers, no, but Sneakers, absolutely. What else is good? Hey, what's wrong with Hackers? Yeah, Sneakers for sure. Okay. I mean, honestly, controversial, maybe a hot take, but Mr. Robot, there's a lot of technically accurate aspects to that show that are pretty great. I forget the name of the producer of the show, but like they hired a whole staff of security researchers, is my understanding, to fill out a lot of the stuff from that show. And I think that's absolutely awesome because if you watch in the first couple episodes, they talk about an old SSH exploit, SSH nuke, and that was really cool to see. Even some of the Bluetooth connections to the like police cars, one I remembered, like that's reasonably accurate. Like, because Mr. Robot does talk on some physical stuff. They definitely went a little far when it came to like breaking everybody out of jail, but I mean, probably not impossible given enough resources, but obviously timelines are condensed for Hollywood, so it is what it is. Yeah, Hackers is great, just not realistic. Yeah, when people place the alarm systems they have in front of their house, says Simon, that's why you put a fake different company in the front. I gotcha. Yep, for context, that makes a lot of sense. That's a great way to do it. Yeah, because if you're a burglar and you think it's ADT you're going after, but it's a different brand, that could be all it takes to trip the alarm because you expect a certain thing. Yep, that's a great point. Danny, Core Atna from Tanium was the advisor on Mr. Robot. That's awesome. Okay. Yeah, Mr. Robot, mostly realistic. Never fear, I is here. Oh, that's great. That's great. Yeah, Mr. Robot, love that show. They got a little ephemeral with the second season. Could still enjoy it, but yeah, most of the hackery goodness, I feel first season was just like, let's go. Let's go. Black Hat, the movie was supposedly good. Which one was that? I don't remember. I don't think I saw that one. But if it's called Black Hat, that's sending quite the message. Yeah, I'm sure if the community received it well, they probably did some things right with it. Probably did some things right. I wish more movies would, yeah, pull a Mr. Robot and actually do it right. Invest in some talent, some people that know their stuff that can actually speak to things and get it in there because it's folks like us in this community that see that and like, oh, this show just got even better because they actually, had proper syntax for an Nmap scan or something along those lines. Absolutely love it. 2015 release. I don't know if I can pull up my web browser without dorking this whole thing up, but I'll have to look into that. Oh, that's great. Jim says, interesting things. Some of the old tactics that are shown being used again because of reintroduced code and people forgot about them. Example, DNS tunneling. Yes, that is absolutely true. Some of these old TTPs are coming back into play. DNS tunneling certainly one. When I've seen kind of research a little bit too on the cyber side is tools like Subterfuge, a little bit older man in the middle tool, but basically like local ARP spoofing, more, yeah, we're finding more efficient ways to pull off old TTPs that we kind of wrote off and we assume are all patched or gone or whatever else it might be. But yeah, they're some are making a comeback. I've seen a bit of that in the layer two world as well with Yersinia. That's what it was called. Yersinia, which is the Latin name for the bubonic plague. It's a layer tool testing tool, also largely for Cisco devices and otherwise, where yeah, you can do all sorts of fun things like 802.1q VLAN tag manipulation and everything else for VLAN hopping. Because it seems like the industry was super into private VLANs for a while and sort of like came back to just like regular VLAN for segmentation. And yeah, I agree with you, Jim. There's a lot of cool things coming back, and it's neat to see the cyclical nature of a lot of the industry here. Especially ARP spoofing, says Jim, because people are moving away from Cisco a lot and the protections don't apply to enterprise HP and Ubiquity. Yep, that's fair. That is fair. Cisco's doing Cisco stuff these days. Oh my goodness. That's a good point. I have a Ubiquity setup at home. I'd be curious to try some things on that. That's a good point. Love the comments. Oh, and Heather threw in here in the chat. That looks like the link for the firefighter, the chaos tool. Okay, awesome. Thank you, Heather. Sweet. Another question. Is the mustache real or part of your disguise? Either way, it's 100% awesome. Thank you, anonymous attendee. That's what we go for. It is indeed fake. It's a stick on. No, just kidding. It's not. It's real. I use it to look mature and distinguished. Goodness gracious. But thank you. Let's go. Sweet. Well, I think we're coming up pretty close on time. So we'll wrap. If there's any other questions, feel free to reach out. We've got my email in the bio and everything else. Happy to keep conversations going. And I do believe we've got some 3D printing up next. So that's a lot to look forward to. All right. Well, thank everyone for their time and interaction. It's greatly appreciated. And I hope there's been some takeaways here. Thanks, y'all. Oh, this button.